everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob. Hey, Rob, it's me, Jackie.
That was really, really lovely. And it's me, Diana. Hi.
Well, it's so good to see everybody. It's so nice to have everyone around. But you know what's not nice and has been kind of grinding my gears? It's grind my gears. It's grind my gears episode.
Everything
perhaps.
grinds your gears.
My gears are grinded. I'm gonna say right now is, I know, we've been doing this podcast for a while. Every week we talk about, behavior analysis and behavioral analytic research. We'll have a topic. We talk about relevant articles. And I know the past couple of years, I've been very excited in that we had a lot of episodes and a lot of great guests where we've been talking about real meaningful societal level change towards like equity practices. And oh boy, I've been getting really jazzed on the subject. And I think some of the, of all the terrible, terrible things that happened during our pandemic, one of the things that might be a positive is everyone kind of having such a big change, willing to try some new things. And then it feels like some of that spirit is starting to dwindle. And so we are very fortunate to have joining us on the show today, a guest who I hope is going to kind of rekindle some of that fire and degrind the gears that are going on, because I think we're going to be talking about some meaningful social justice practices and some writings about that and things that we can keep doing to kind of keep kindling that desire for change in more equitable ways, not like change back to the way things were a long time ago. We don't want that change. We want the good kind of change. And we're gonna be joined. We're joined by a special guest to do that, Dr. Malika Pritchett. Malika, thank you so much for being on our show today. And hopefully, no pressure to degrind the gears, but I think this is going to be a very exciting episode. I know I was very excited to talk about the articles that you've written and co-written. They really jazzed me up when I was reading them. So I think we're going to succeed in that mission.
Oh, thank y'all for having me. It's fun to talk science with other people that love science. So to be honest with you, this is a cool way to spend my afternoon. Thank you for having me and inviting me.
Beautiful. So we have a couple articles that we will be doing most of our discussion around. And Diana, can you please share what those articles are?
I sure can. So we have 3 articles that Malika has provided to us that we will review and contribute to our discussion today. They include Social Justice is the Spirit and Aim of an Applied Science of Human Behavior, Moving from Colonial to Participatory Research Practices. That's by Pritchett, Elia Rosales, Recruz, and Sihon, and that was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2022. Also, we were very fortunate to be treated to a book chapter. Mm-hmm. That was titled From Fuller to Fawcett, A Human Rights History of Research Ethics in Behavior Analysis. I can't wait to talk about this, by Pritchett, Elia Rosales, Sihon, and Recruz. And that was chapter 1, published in the book Research Ethics in Behavior Analysis. And finally, Critical Race Theory in Education, How Banning Its Tenets Undermines Our Best Hope for Equity in Education, by Carwer and Pritchett. And that was published in Behavior and Social Issues 2023.
Wow, I was going to say that's so recently, but now we're in 2024. So 2023 is old news.
Old news.
Oh, it's old stuff.
What's up next? I'm just kidding.
All
these articles are like such labors of love, and there's so much work that goes into getting these prepped and ready and then actually like out the door for people to see. So every academic heart just sank when you said,
the jerks like me are like, oh, that's last year. That's not the current year. That's how I judge research on this show. Like I say, what year was that? Oh, that's not this year, so it must be old. No. Let's start off by learning a little bit more about you as a practitioner and how you kind of came to be, creating work and research and, doing what you do related to social justice.
Oh man, this is a hard set of questions, right? So I think that who I am is important because it has a lot to do with why I attack things the way that I do in regard to science and just like everyday life. But I grew up in a city in the north of Dallas called Allen, Texas. And if you've ever heard of Allen, you know that it has like the biggest high school football stadium there ever was. But growing up north of Dallas as a young Black girl that had very different demographics growing up was a little bit isolating but also enriching. So I think that it's important to understand the fact that I was isolated in the sense that there were not a lot of brown and Black people in my community, but it was very enriching in the sense that everybody really cared about learning a lot. And I took really advanced classes in high school, and all of those classes growing up in the city that I grew up in, high school was an offshoot to college. So everybody talks about going to college. I don't think that a lot of people that grew up in different high schools maybe have had that same upbringing, right? Some went to college, some did not. But all of those post-high school experiences are valuable. But in my community, everybody was like, well, what's next? And I think that I've kind of lived my life in that context. My parents were always like, what's next? The community that I grew up in was like, what's next? And I married my husband. He grew up in Los Angeles, and the conversation was always what's next. And for him, it was very high level sports. He played football and basketball. And so that's kind of the way that I lived my life. But one of the things that I will say is that once I entered the science of applied behavior analysis, and specifically behavior analysis, the conversation, it was always what's next. And my mentors have always done the what's next thing. So I think that the traditional way that people talk on podcasts is like, well, what high school did you go to? And what college did you go to? And blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm like literally a story of failures. I decided I was going to be a marine biologist and decided to apply to San Diego State. And I didn't apply to any Texas schools out of high school. And my GPA dropped because I thought I was doing so great. And I got to San Diego State and they kicked me out. And they said, your GPA dropped. You had a provisional admission. You can't come to our campus. I had already decided where I was going to live and all of that. My grandmother was there. And they kicked me out, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I went back to community college and met the best professors ever. And I'm still a scientist to this day, but sometimes you just got to get kicked in the rear and and have people around you being like, well, what's next? So I say all of that to say, anyway, I got kicked out of San Diego State, came back to community college, and I'm a lover of community college. If there's anybody that potentially didn't know what they were going to do or got sidetracked, like community college was the foundation of my life. And one of my professors wrote in the margins of one of my papers, he was a history professor, he said, you should go to graduate school. And the rest is history. And I did. Like, I found my way to behavior analysis in a wayward way, but I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't get kicked out of a good institution all the way back to Texas. And then a community college professor saw my writing and said, you can do this, which is cool.
That's good.
That is awesome.
Good. A happy, well, not an ending because, things are still going on, but a happy path overall.
I figured it out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, so in terms of talking about, kind of the what's next, I mean, were the writings that you've done, so far on social justice and then sort of writing in terms of collaboration regarding some social justice practices such as critical race theory, was that something that you targeted right away, like right in grad school, right as you were doing research? Yep, this is what I'm into. This is what my mentors are into. Or was it something that you developed an interest in a different way?
That's actually a really good question. I'm a child of the University of North Texas. The University of North Texas has a wonderful behavior analytic program in Denton, Texas. And I stumbled into that program because a good friend of mine found that I had finished my bachelor's degree in communication sciences and disorders. And I worked for a school district and I worked in deaf education. And my second language is American Sign Language. But I realized that no matter how much sign language I knew, no matter how much heart I had for these young children, their communication difficulties were leading to challenging behaviors that I had no idea what to do with. And so I kind of went to, this is not a joke, I'm not speaking in hyperbole, I went to a good friend of mine's barbecue that was in the Department of Behavior Analysis and getting his master's degree. His name is Donnie. And I said, Donnie, I don't know what to do with my life. And he was like, can you stop being dramatic for 1 second and tell me what you like? And then long story short, I went to visit the department and I said, I think I'll apply here. So I didn't apply to any other master's programs. I heard about behavior analysis at a party with Donnie over a beer, and got in somehow. I'm not sure why they let me in, but obviously, I mean, I had a good GPA. I got kicked out of San Diego State, and so I had something to give to the man. And so I had a really good GPA, and I had a lot of thought processes behind what I wanted to do, but I didn't know anything about behavior analysis. And frankly, they made me take extra courses before I started my master's degree because I didn't have a background. So I had to take extra courses over the summer and pay out of pocket before they let me into the program. And I was fine with that. Like, I understand you don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what you're doing, but I have a good science background and that let me in. So I don't know if that answers your question necessarily, but what it does is it put me in the heart of, and I don't say this lightly, some of the best behavior analysts in our field currently, and, you know, the next generations of. I lived in that incubator. And so when you live in an incubator of true scientists, they're constantly innovative. Like, that's cool, but what's next? So I don't know if that answered your question. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I mean, there's so much good context, I think, when we talk about sort of our areas of writing, our areas of research, our areas of interest in the fields of behavior analysis that is always, very appreciated, I think, by a lot of people, but definitely by us here on the show. So when you think about behavior analysis, or specifically applied behavior analysis, I mean, do you see our field as a social justice science? It comes up in your writing, I think, that it should be, could be, would be, might be, but there are a lot of contexts and a lot of factors that sort of go into whether we are or are not agents of meaningful and helpful and equitable change. So at this point, because I'm sure perspectives and your own opinion changes on that, should ABA, or is ABA inherently a social justice science? What do you think?
The wonderful thing about applied behavior analysis, I'm not going to say behavior analysis. It's important to say applied before this conversation.
Yeah.
The wonderful thing about applied behavior analysis is that applied behavior analysis has the concern of society and speaks to society's concerns. Ideally. The thought process is, if society comes to us and says, this is a horrific situation that I'm living in, my life is not well, so on and so forth, ideally, science can be, the applied science of behavior analysis can be a way in which to investigate those difficulties and perhaps acknowledge some changes that can happen, not have solutions all the time. So is applied behavior analysis a social justice orientation? I would say yes. Applied behavior analysis is the most humanitarian science I can ever imagine in my life, in the sense that there is no such thing as, and Dr. Fryman, Pat Fryman, does this very well in a lovely, I'm so sorry, I cannot remember the name of the title of the paper, but he talks about no such thing as a bad boy, but terrible circumstances, where he links back to to Father Flanagan's work at Boys Town. And the thought process is, these are just horrible circumstances, and how do we adjust to them? That's the most humble and human thing that you can do for folks. So the tangent that we went on in the social justice paper with myself and my colleagues, which are my dissertation committee, is that we don't need a whole nother branch of science. We don't need a whole nother branch of applied behavior analysis. Inherent to applied means that you're hoping for improvement of quality of life. And equity is one of those conversations, which is what social justice is all about. So I don't think we need another branch. Please don't create another podcast or another... I say this to my students all the time. Please don't create anything new, because applied is... like everything that is part of our applied science is it's all there. So let's just hunker down and do good work.
That sounds
I respect
good.
That.
Yes. Very nice. So when we think of, there was a quote that you put in the chapter that you wrote by Bandura that I wrote it in my notes because I really liked it. And I think it had a lot to do with sort of the idea of how we can, as a field, be agents of change. So the quote was, "One must distinguish between social regulation and treatment. Social regulation subordinates the interest of the individual to the group, prescribed conduct by institutional means, and authorizes coercive measures to force compliance. Then ellipses. In the case of treatment, the interests of the individual are given priority, personal consent and choice about direction of change are possible, the right to terminate the relationship is recognized, and the agent of change works mainly for the benefit of the individual seeking help. And I absolutely loved that quote, especially where it came in the chapter, because it was very much after I already felt very like jazzed and galvanized for, yes, I hate all the systems. I want them gone. I want new, better systems. And I think this captured where I used to be as an applied behavior analyst and sort of where I have gone in my own career in terms of so much of my work being about how do I fix this person so they can fit into the box that they have been prescribed by powers that be, not recognizing I was even doing that, to the point of these boxes suck and I want to help this individual be the best them. And that does include the need to make more change beyond just, well, I have to help you so that you can fit into the environment that exists because that's just the best it's going to be. I don't know. Am I on the right page with sort of how I should be reading that quote or thinking about that quote, or am I just putting my own baggage into a quote that had a different context that you were meaning for?
No, I would like to ask why you got so jazzed about that.
I've worked in public schools for a very long time. And I hate the American public school system at this point because it is clearly not set up to support individual growth. Maybe it was at one point. I don't think it ever was really. I think that was a goal. And I think it still is a goal to some extent, but it has increasingly become such a system that talks a big game about equity. But I think, as you wrote in a lot of your papers, sometimes it ends up being a lot of tokenism of like, well, we can have this group or that group. And look, we're going to put them in the newsletter, you know, this person of color, or this person from this, you know, this ethnic group or this disability group. And I think there's a will for more, but I think everyone's just stuck in these really just harmful systems. And some of it's because they don't recognize they're in harmful systems. Some of it is that they are gaining power from the harmful systems. There's less of those people, I would say. And when I read anything these days, especially something as sort of thorough, like your two pieces, what a great journey. I loved reading about history, how it related to the field. There was just so much context as to where we came from as a field in terms of research practices and how, you know, our inequity was something that developed and how it's still a part of what we do in ways that we wouldn't think of because, you know, we're all good people and we all practice ethics, and therefore it couldn't be inequitable. And I think I just got to that point in the chapter where I was just so excited to hear where so much of this came from, how it doesn't have to be this way anymore, and how there have been thinkers and continue to be thinkers that recognize the importance of the individual and treatment to support, you know, removing those coercive influences. I think it's a quote that I probably would have missed if I'd read it like 10 years ago, and I would have been like, yes, these sound like nice things, but it is important that we all follow the rules because the rules are there to help us. You know, I don't think I would have been as excited about it, but it felt like it answered a lot of questions that I either had or didn't know I had. So I was just like feeling very engaged like the whole time I remember where I was. I was waiting for my son to get out of baseball practice. I was sitting in a very cold car up here in Massachusetts, and I was just having a great time. And I was like, I hope his practice doesn't let out soon because I really want to finish this article in one sitting. I don't want to have to come back to it later. I want to just get through it and like really just take it all in.
That quote should go in the back of the book cover. Right?
I read it in a cold car, says Robert Perry Cruz.
I hope my kid doesn't come so I can finish this sentence. Well, what I will say is that I think academia has a lot of problems. I think this authorship lineage is a problem, right? So you're talking about from Fuller to Fawcett. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny, I'm just looking at the lineage right now. It says my name and then my mentor, Dr. Shala Lyron, Dr. Tracy Sheehan, and Dr. Alicia Recruz. And this is all my dissertation committee. And it's so funny because you mentioned that section of the chapter, and that comes from Tracy. I was sitting in her house and we were drinking coffee, and she just grabs this book, and we have a problem. Like, you can see behind me, your viewers won't, or your listeners won't have a chance, but I have so many books. My husband's like, enough's enough. Do you know what I mean? And so now Tracy and Shala and I in particular have this we have a little group where books will show up, but I didn't buy it, so I'm not in trouble.
Oh.
But Tracy and Shallow will send me books, and then I'll steal their books from their bookshelves, and they'll call me and be like, where was this book? Anyway, long story short,
Right.
Tracy found that in a book while we were writing this chapter together as part of my dissertation. And I was sitting at her house at a very ungodly hour, like 6 a.m., and she read it to me, and I was like, we need to write this down and don't paraphrase it and put it in quotes and on and on. And I think the long story short is probably what kind of resonated with you is it talked about the institution of research and perhaps the institution of all of the things that are under the umbrella of inquiry that really have a lot of nuances behind them. And I'm part of the nuance, and so are you, and so is everybody probably listening to this, meaning that I had to publish something or I had to actually write a dissertation in order to finish my degree. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm mentoring students at the University of Kansas, which is the joy of my life. But our master's students are in a very good but very demanding program, and they have to do a thesis at the end of it, and they're exhausted. And I love them. I know they're listening once we have this conversation, but they're working very hard. And science doesn't progress because people are comfortable all the time. Science progresses because we find cool stuff, we interrogate it, we push to the next venture. And I think that when Tracy found this, I was like, yes. And so the thing I'll say about authorship is like, I'm at the front, but goodness gracious, like this is not a single solitary exploration. It's just not. Like any scientist or group of scientists that you know, they're together. There's a group, there's a cohort. And coming from the University of North Texas, we've always talked about our cohorts, always talked to the people that are with us. The professors that push me terrify me into a new dimension. And Dr. Recruz should be shouted out because she's an applied anthropologist. She's not a behavior analyst. She loves the work that we do. And she's part of our push forward in the sense that let's look at things interdisciplinary wise. And I'm terrified constantly, but I keep writing. I keep writing and I keep reading.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
So speaking of the faucet to Fuller, Fuller to Faucet, which way does it go?
Fuller first.
Fuller to Faucet. You know, I think, again, there are some writings that, and I kind of already mentioned this, that when they take you on a journey and then they sort of get to, and the main point was this, but before we get to that, you know, the narrative story, the historical context, not story, I should say that demeans the folks who had to live a lot of those experiences, but that context, I really appreciated just how detailed it was, how it focused on some of the key areas, then came back to the central thesis of the chapter and the importance of understanding where we came from in terms of our field's research practices and therefore how we would want to change them. You know, there's a lot of history. If folks, you know, hopefully, I don't know if everyone's gonna be able to get the whole book, but there's the tables, just the historical, here are the main historical components of sort of research. Here it is for behavior analysis, more specifically, was just create that time. It was just timeline kind of in that table form.
I just would like to shout out the table again. I just want to emphasize and underline and highlight and maybe circle the table. Although the table is multiple pages long. So I was like, oh, this is like, you know, one page. It's not one page. It's like 4 pages, but it's so good. Jackie, are you about to say the same thing? I can see you.
So when I first opened, I was like, 34 pages. I have to read a chapter that's 34 pages. I'm like such a student. I'm like, And so I'm reading along. I'm like, okay, all right, this is really good. And then I get to the table and I was like, okay, thinking it's going to be like 1 or 2 pages. And I'm like, how can it possibly be 1 or 2 pages? Because it spans the entire history of our field. And what a wonderful testament to have that all in one place.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love it. I'm sorry, Malika. I'm just like gushing over the table, and just thank you for putting the work in to assemble that together, because I do review, you know, pieces of this sort of timeline with my students in my class, and I talk about the history of our field and the journey that we have been on with respect to ethics and research. But seeing it all summarized there is just truly fantastic, because there's a lot of, as you said, nuance with respect to, you know, when did behavior analysis come into play, and who were the early behavior analysts, because they weren't called behavior analysts necessarily, right? But like, when did that sort of stream get established, and like recognizing how late it is in that whole timeline journey and how late some of the other pieces are, like the Belmont report too. Like, it's all recent history, which just, again, underlines how much work continues to need to be done. And hopefully conversations that we'll be having in 20 years time will sound different than they do today.
I hope so. Y'all are the sweetest. I mean, I appreciate you loving the same things that I do. I would like to nerd out about one section of the table, and then we can go into the next question. So at the University of North Texas, I had Dr. Shala Laya-Rosales is my mentor, and really honestly, like, a very good friend at the end of the day. And she guided me through a lot of things. And one of the things that she never let me do is not just like, am I allowed to say a curse word? It's not a bad one.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't half-ass your research, right? Yeah. And so if I was interested in anything, I had to dive very deep. And I have been in the depths of some wild things in the library, in the sense that I'm not that old, I promise, but I'm going to sound a little older. Kids these days will look online and be like, this is the end of the Belmont report. And I had done enough research to be like, this is not the end of the Belmont report. I know that there's appendices. And I went to my library at University of North Texas and I said, I want to get the Belmont report. And they said, well, it's online. You can just read it. And I'm like, no, there's appendices. And I'm a very like laid back. I have a different personality. I have a personality like my dad, like just very quiet and laid back. But if I get upset, the world starts to pay attention. And this poor person working at my library, I was like, I need the appendices to the Belmont report. There's 3 of them, Roman numeral 1 and 2 and 3. And finally, I think she was like, okay, like, Malika's enough of an upset doc student that and I went down in the stacks, long story short, and found the appendices that I knew existed. And I read them. And one of the appendices, the Belmont report, was a wonderful report that the U.S. government put out because of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And the government finally said, we have to talk about under what context research should happen and onto whom and so on and so forth. And the only behavior analyst that was part of that committee, there was lawyers, there was theologists, there were philosophers, there were scientists, and there was one behavior analyst that was part of the Belmont Report committee. His name was Israel Golddiamond. And Israel Golddiamond was the only behavior analyst that was part of that committee. And he talks about human rights with regard to operant learning and operant conditioning and so on and so forth. And Israel Golddiamond is a very important part of behavior analysis. Yeah. And I feel very passionate about the history and understanding why we got to this point as an applied science, right? I'm not talking about all of the science of behavior analysis, but from a human rights perspective, Israel Golddiamond was one of the first, not the first, right? And so that's what Shala is constantly talking to me about. Like, Malika, this is not a new idea. Like, I'll get jazzed about something and call her or text her, and she's like, bro, 1930s, get it together. And I will. I'll get it together and I'll figure it out. But I'm not doing anything new. I'm just synthesizing information. And I hope that the history of behavior analysis, I'm part of the history of behavior analysis special interest group that Dr. Ed Morris at the University of Kansas leads for us. So I'm very passionate about the history. And I think that the reason why people in behavior analysis are not as savvy as they could be is because they're missing out on the theory and philosophy and the history of the science. And I am worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And then for context, I mean, everyone probably learned about the Belmont Report in grad school.
I
but
think so.
You have to.
No, I learned about it when I needed to read portions of it for my city training to serve as a community member on an IRB.
Oh,
it's the first. I mean, I'm guessing I heard about it at some point, but it was one of those like I'm not a researcher, so who cares? Yeah. I'm sure the people in charge, they've read this back and front. I'm sure they do this every day perfectly. I don't need to worry about it. I'm going to move on and whistle a happy tune to my non-research work.
But there's 1979, and then there are 3 main tenets of it, which are beneficence, justice, and respect for persons. Did I get that?
Yeah,
I nailed
1978. But yes.
78. Oh, okay. Great.
1979 is just an awesome song by the Smashing
That's
Pumpkins.
right. Yes.
That's a good one. Kind of sad.
Also a good
Kinda
year. Yeah, it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad.
But I like Smashing Pumpkins a lot.
Oh, good. I'm even more jazzed now. I like that too.
Yeah. So that's the context. And I know like you're
we can
saying,
talk about another podcast.
and it's so funny because it's like I'm sitting here saying it's not that long ago, and you're saying it was here the whole time. But both of those things are really true because our field is not that old, right? And
no,
the applied component has absolutely been present from the beginning, right? And we can go back and talk about Wolf and social validity and Java itself. But all of this happened in a short span of time if we really think about it.
It's not been long. And I really do feel like if people don't understand the historical context of the US in 1968, they won't understand why applied came about. And I don't have the privilege of talking to Doctors Bayer, Wolf, and Risley, but I have the privilege of talking to their predecessors. And I think that their worry and concern was that there are very important things happening in our world. And I know, I wasn't in Lawrence, Kansas at this point, but I know that the conversation about civil rights and all of the injustices around civil rights was something that must have been the back burner for what caused them to say, we have a science about behavior. How do we apply it to make sure that people's lives improve? And that's why Juniper Gardens is one of the most amazing conversations that you'll have with people, especially at KU, about there was conversations about the fact that Black and brown children learned at lower rates, that Black and brown children were illiterate, that Black and brown children and so on and so forth. And Juniper Gardens really took a particular amount of time to put the research behind it to say, just so you know, if you encounter children and you give them all of these words and you give them all this conversation and all of this reading opportunities, then you'll see the same trajectory as you would a white child in that same demographic and so on and so forth. So behavior analysis, applied behavior analysis in particular, is one of the most optimistic and humanizing sciences I've ever encountered because it disproves all of these assumptions about people's backgrounds and origins that a lot of our society will put on you.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey, everybody. Sorry to pause the conversation, but I wanted to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your show notes descriptor in your podcast app. That'll take you right there where you're going to need to enter in some key information about yourself, as well as 2 special guest secret code words. And these came from Dr. Pritchett. And the first one is applied. APPLIED. Applied, like our science of behavior analysis. That's what the A in ABA Inside Track stands for. Applied. All right, back to our discussion. So when we're going to go back to the table because we all love
yes, of course. Okay.
No. We're still on that. I don't think we left the table. If listeners were like, and now they're going to say, no, we'll go back to the table, folks, because you might not have it in front of you as you're listening to this. We've talked about a couple events that were sort of historical importance in relation to sort of the movement for social justice in terms of the movement for our improved ethics in applied behavior analysis. Are there ones on there, if you could sort of, magic wand, all right, these one or these two, they're magically going to appear in every graduate syllabus for behavior analysis tomorrow, and everyone will need to learn about it because it is just so key to understanding the changes that have happened and or need to continue happening?
That's a really good question. Holy smokes.
I don't have a magic wand, though, so it is a hypothetical magic wand.
Caveat.
I will learn more about it. So that's at least one person.
You can use my magic wand, Rob.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. It's so kind
generous.
of you.
Oh, please send me one. I feel like
Yes, I'll bring it to you, too.
Geraldo Rivera's expose on Willowbrook was pretty pronounced and difficult to watch to this day. I actually, when I assign students that, it's on YouTube now, when I assign students that to watch, I watch it myself just to process the emotions and to go along with them, because I watched it as a young graduate student, and it was difficult to see the idea that certain persons, because of whatever ability they had that didn't match up to what was the norm, faced them to be in circumstances where they were isolated under the guise of education and better life, isolated from their families. This is really difficult, right? So I watch it often, but it's not easy for me. And that's one of the things that I'll say about, like, people are like, well, Malika, why does it take you so long to write? And I'm working on a manuscript that I've been working on with my colleagues and I for the last 3 years about abolitionism in public schools, which draws a lot of inspiration from other disciplines, but it takes a lot of time because it's exhausting. I'll write a paragraph and just be flat out on my couch for a while. This is really hard. And you take the history into account. So I think that's one of them. The Willowbrook expose is one of them. If I could, I would assign this article that came out of Playboy magazine. I don't know if it's still in print. Is Playboy still in print?
I remember they moved to online only, I think. I don't know if they have you can still, so. It's in the brown wrappers at the convenience store, like when I was
That's too bad.
Well, they do have a playboy.com club. You have a club.
Jackie's the brave person who's
incognito mode on this.
No, it's my personal computer. It doesn't look like they have a magazine anymore. But they do have a Playboy Club TV archive shop articles, but I think they're... Oh, it says read it for the articles. That's hilarious. There's not really articles.
There was a good article. There are good articles in Playboy. But I know you want to tell a story, Malika, but my creative writing professor was very proud to be published in Playboy and brought the magazine for us all and read from it so that we could see that it was actually
sadly no longer employed for bringing Playboy to school.
Mm-hmm.
That's too bad.
I believe I know the article that you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually, all jokes aside, Playboy was this magazine that obviously catered to who knows who was reading it, right? But the young women, potentially with or without clothing, but then also really important articles. So one of the articles in Playboy magazine, and it came out pretty regularly. I wasn't reading them, but I know of them. But Zap Your Normal was published by Playboy magazine in 1973. And in the 70s, there were a lot of conversations in popular media about under what conditions should you change people's behavior? Should you make them normal? Should you not make them normal? Same as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and so on. These conversations are not old, they're new. And so that's one of the conversations is read about Willowbrook and how people were treated when they were considered persons that needed to be in special schools or settings in order to gain education, which really just meant just isolate them and not give them anything and take away their rights as human. And then okay, these people don't have disabilities. Well, let's change their behavior still, which was behavior modification back in the day. But Playboy magazine had a problem with that. So Geraldo's talking about it. Playboy magazine's talking about it. These are provocative conversations about, should you change people's behavior? Who are you to do that? Under what conditions? And what constitutes normal? And I don't think those conversations are changing as we're sitting here today. I just think that they're being told in different ways.
Malika, that seems like a good segue to talk about one of your other articles, sort of looking at the history, or not the history, but sort of the trajectory of JABA in terms of reporting on some of these issues. Do you mind? So, I mean, the quick of it was looking at, a number of articles each decade from the beginning of JABA to almost the present day, and sort of looking at a number of factors to see how has our field progressed in terms of reporting on areas that are going to be related to the things we talked about, as part of the Belmont report, right? And there were a number of factors that you and the team were looking at. Some of them were a little bit more straightforward in terms of like demographic information, ethnicity. A few of them, though, I was reading, and you have, again, another great table. This is the great table episode, I think, going into sort of some of those definitions. I still was very amazed that the group could come up with definitions and ways to measure things that sound very abstract to me, like empowerment and identity as a part of this. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what those conversations were like to be able to quantify, yes, this article does reflect empowerment in this is how it does so? Because you defined it super well. But I still was like, this must have been such a hard thing to do.
It was very hard. Thank you for recognizing that. One of the conversations that we had ongoing, I would like to back up just a little bit. The University of North Texas, again, I can't say enough about the program, but the lab that we had that Dr. Eli Rosales and Dr. Recruz ran, that I was part of as a graduate student, and then my colleagues that were undergraduate students that got excited about this project too, it was a social justice lab at UNT. That's almost unheard of, right? A social justice lab that takes a lot of disciplines in. And our lab was not an easy lab. It was very difficult. We asked really difficult questions, and in some regards, we had really difficult conversations. And I hope that the harm that was caused in difficult conversations didn't impact people for too long. But sometimes difficult conversations are necessary to figure out innovative answers. So one of the conversations we had was, and I love analyzing content. I'm really interested in reading things that have been published and permanent products. And Skinner talked about, or there was a place in a textbook that was talking about, how do you know if you write a behavior program for someone to cut the grass, what's the easiest way to figure out if they cut the grass? And I was an undergrad or a graduate student. I was like, count number of times I hear lawnmowers start. Count number of, and then at the end of the paragraph, it was like, just see if the grass is cut and it's lower than it was before. So these permanent products are this most ingenious thing in the sense that look at it before, see if there was a change, and then look at it after. And so permanent products to me, which are journal articles, are, did the grass get cut? Do you know what I mean? Like, tell me whether or not the article, took these things about what it means to be applied, or so on and so forth. And so our thought process was, well, the Belmont report says that everybody in biomedical and behavioral sciences should talk about consent, should talk about whether or not there was beneficence, the outcomes of the research benefited the participants, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So let's just read all these articles and score them. I say just read all these articles and score them with my fellow iterators. This was a lot of work, and it was exhausting, and it took us months, and we're paper and pencil doing this. And we adjusted our scoring protocol. We're like, nope, this is not an objective way to measure assent. But I really hope that somebody, hashtag not it, not me, does this more and continues to do some good work with looking at research articles that are published, measuring these things. Julia Ferguson, a good friend of mine, Dr. Ferguson now, did a wonderful review of just social validity measures. Looked at a bunch of articles, measure if they counted social validity or not. I think that's the way to interrogate in applied science. And I hope it continues. I'm just real tired.
Well, when I originally read it, I missed the part that it was sort of like more of a sampling procedure, and I was like, how did 4 people read every JAMA article? And I think there must be like 10 or 12 different measures to look at, and some of them were going to be relatively quick, like they got a Likert scale, they don't. That's one way, but that's not even all of social validity. Like there's more to it than just the Likert scale. The participants, maybe you could quickly see, did they say who they were? Did they report demographic, right? But some of the pieces, like looking at identity, that's not a one and done. Like participants, identity, and then here's a list of, because it was I think identity was one that was like a combination of a lot of other factors that would need to be reported on, that you're not just going to get from a table. As much as we're loving tables, they're not reporting that information in those.
We read each article, if I'm not mistaken, Joseph, Melody, and they both went on to graduate school work and wonderful behavior analysts. We read each article independently over a summer 3 times each, scoring, and then revised our scoring method. And I was like, man, these undergrad students are going to be all done with Malika at the end of this. And they just hung on. They cared so much, and they wanted to know so much, and I think it worked out. But it's just the start. It scratched the surface. It was a sampling procedure, but I hope more comes of it.
Well, it was a lot of work, and hopefully at the end of it, you finished. The undergraduate students who are helping you, they finished, and what the graph was, everything's going up, up, up. Everything's getting better and better as time goes on. So y'all could be happy that all that hard work paid off by demonstrating how great the field is and never stop getting better, right? Is that was the end?
No, that wasn't the end. The graphs looked really great. The graphs looked really great until the 90s. And then things in Texas, we call it a crapshoot. I don't know if they say that in Massachusetts.
I don't know. I'm also from Texas, so.
Oh, you are?
Do you not say things are...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I grew up a bunch of places, but one of them I lay claim to was Louisville.
Yeah, that's right north of Dallas, or Denton.
Yeah.
Or south of Denton.
Yeah, right in between.
You're down the street. Yeah. You know crapshoot.
I know crapshoot, but then you made me think that that's a regional term. I don't know.
I've heard the term something being a crapshoot. I don't know what a crapshoot is. I just assumed it always just meant bad, like it was like animals crap down the chute. I don't know.
I don't know. It's like
it was a game.
A chance. It's a chance shot.
I thought it was a game, like crap.
Like craps.
Oh no,
you're probably right.
It's not a game. It goes down and quickly.
Oh, just a literal crap.
It's a literal. Okay,
literal.
Shoot for crap.
It must have something to do with farmers. I'll Google it later.
Yeah. No, this is making sense now. Okay. Never thought about the etymology of that word.
I love Louisville.
They have a good lake. I was there a long time ago.
Oh, you have a great lake.
Yep, there was a nice lake there. I left there in 1992, so it's been a while.
Right around the same time.
Are you a Louisville farmer? That's the high school. I knew they were.
I didn't make it to high school there. I left before I got to high school.
You could have been a farmer.
Yes, I could have been a farmer. I do remember that. Yeah. Anyway, track. And my mom went to UNT for a while too. So.
See, it's the best. I would still live there if I could, but I don't know how we got it off track.
I know, sorry.
But anyway, the data looks pretty disheartening after that. But I think we know why. It's just a matter of doing conceptual and contingency analyses of the research and publications. And we only looked at JABA. There's a very specific conversation about what that journal means and what they hope to publish. And I've spoken to a lot of editors and previous editors of the journal, and we've got a lot to think about. So there's a lot of contingencies in place. Nobody's at fault. The conversation about science is where are we and what next? I think that's that bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know I was really surprised about, measures like social validity. It just seems like, Montwolf published in 78 about finding our heart. And then we all read that article and everyone loves social validity. And we spend all the time on all the social validity. And I have just been, as someone who reads a lot of research, I know the Likert scale about, did you like this? You think this was good research? It's not quite the same as like super meaningful social validity measures, but it was something. I was surprised that even that didn't have sort of an upward trend. So like 78 and up, like everyone got it. Okay, we get the memo. We should be paying attention to social validity for our participants. But even that, the scores were, like you said, kind of 90s and then drop off. I know there's a lot of context there, but like for that specifically, what are some of the factors that played into that? I mean, was it just a JABA related thing versus other journals, or where the research funding was coming from? Like, I know you mentioned a lot of factors in the article.
Well, y'all, I don't know.
Yeah, that's
it's
a big issue. So I mean, I don't think it's like, oh, it's this, of course, but
right, because we are talking about some very high level issues that exist within not only our field, right, but psychology as a whole, education as a whole.
The medical field as a whole has this issue.
Yep, exactly, right? So
there's a lot of issues in a lot of fields.
Yeah, and our little field is part of the psychology field, which has been built out of the medical field. So we're all following the same, medical model idea of what it is that we need to do as both scientists and practitioners. But there's fault and bias that is built into that system as well. And then, like you said, Rob, the same in the education system, right? It's got ableist core to it as well. And so we all have to figure out how, what is the good within these systems? What is the bias that we need to recognize within the systems? And then how can we then contribute in these areas that in a way that is respectful and, exceedingly client focused. And, your article did not pull any punches. And I loved the radical nature and the way in which you like laid it all out there and talked about it was very, I don't know, just like invigorating, So I think that that's what we all need to hear in our field in order to then figure out how that's going to translate into change. But like, I think that's why this is a tricky topic to talk about, because it's like really big level problems. Like when you start to talk about it, the problems themselves get bigger and bigger because it's systemic problems that we're looking to address. And those are always the ones that seem extremely daunting to attempt to tackle as individuals. But that's how change has to happen. So that's why we're having this convo.
Yeah, we're going to save the world today. I wonder
we're gonna get it done.
That's sarcasm, by the way. My husband said, please tell people when you're being sarcastic. My mom...
Okay. We got it.
Yeah. My mom's half Scottish and half Sudanese and grew up in England. And so I have a very sarcastic personality. And my husband tells me, please put this in parentheses or else people are going to miss it. So if you're British listening, that's going to be easy, but I have to qualify my sarcasm sometimes. I want to interrogate the we in science. I think we often ends up being the scientist. And Beowulf and Risley 68, 87, and so on and so forth said that the we is actually not us as scientists. The we actually is the problems in which society tells us is a problem, and we as a collective. And Dr. C. Fawcett at the University of Kansas, and he's finally entered retirement and hopefully doing whatever leisure sport he likes at this point. But as a student of Mont Wolf, he interrogated what we meant, and that's what was integral in our paper, in the sense that it should be a collaborative conversation about what quality of life means and what improvement of life means. And the reason why I think I haven't been canceled just yet in the science of behavior analysis is that I love the science so much that I interrogate it, including the behavior of my colleagues and myself, not to interrogate to make people feel upset, but to interrogate to say, who are you really doing this for and why, and what's the future purpose? And I am not ever going to do anything perfect myself, and neither are my colleagues. But if we interrogate each other about the why and about the purpose in applied science, then I think we're going to get somewhere more meaningful, because the people will guide the conversation. And the people meaning we're a part of it too. So it's really complicated and integrated and intertwined. But any scientist that claims to know all of the answers and to be the all-knowing is very problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's as nice as I can say it.
Well, I know in both the article and the chapter, you come back to the idea of looking at kind of community-based participatory research. There's the...
And that's Dr. Fawcett's work. That is not my work. I have become in love with it and just carried it, I hope.
So for folks who may not have heard of community-based participatory research, which... Again, I don't think I'd heard of until we did an episode, it must be like a year and a half ago, where I think that was the first time we were looking at research to practice gap. And that's where I sort of became aware of it. However, Fawcett, as in the timeline, that's 91. So this sort of idea of, and you've said this a couple times now, Malika, the idea of like, these aren't new ideas. It's not like someone just came up with this in 2024. So it was cool and recent. Like these are 90s, 70s, like these ideas have come before. But would you mind sort of giving a summary of sort of what community-based participatory research is, and then maybe an example of what it could look like or has looked like when applied to ABA research?
Absolutely. I'll do this really quickly just to synthesize everything. But one of the main reasons why Dr. Elisa Recruz was on my dissertation committee is because she's an applied anthropologist, and she helped Dr. Lai and Dr. Shion and I really understand what this meant. So community-based participatory research comes from action research. And this comes from an anthropological background in the sense that if you're interested in why people do the things that they do, which behavior analysts are inherently interested in if they're interested in humans, is the sense that if somebody comes in and they're doing research on a community, this is very problematic, right? They come in with their own ideas, their assumptions, why things happen. They come in and they do research on a community, whereas community-based participatory research comes from action research in the sense that it's pretty much assumed that if you're going to do research on a community and they'll allow you to do that, there's probably some situations where they're needing help desperately, and they're going to be in a situation where they don't have the resources, or they don't have the empowerment to get out of the situation that they're in without some sort of integration from scientists or professionals. But you can solve the problem a couple different ways, right? And so participatory action research says that you should ensure that the people that are experiencing the problem themselves are in the equation of the solving, not people coming in and deciding how to solve the problem for you. Does that make sense? It's not easy, and it's very nuanced. And I don't want to use a bunch of words that are not compassionate in the sense of people are suffering, people are trying to solve the problem. But participatory action research has an underlining of social justice in the sense that these people are suffering, and you need to actually make sure that you don't come in and impose your will on them to solve their suffering, just so that once you leave, the suffering continues. And if in a lot of unfortunate circumstances with researchers, the community is worse off than they were before you came in. There's a lot of examples of that. I just don't want to get in the weeds too much. But to be participatory means that the persons that are experiencing the problem are part of the solution, and they work together. And there's a community approach to the solving of the problem. Did I say all of that? I always ask my students, like, did that make sense?
to my understanding, yeah.
And I'm very passionate about it. So if it doesn't make sense, I'll say it in different words.
One thing I love about this way of doing research is that the participants are active within the research question and the procedures throughout the entire process, right? So if something goes amiss in the middle, you're like, we're going to change this, and we're not going to be like, but this is what I wrote down, and I don't want to have to do an IRB modification, right? So I love that.
Jackie, you said it better than I could. That's what it is. Right, but I just get all riled up.
Right. And the article by Fawcett in 91 is one of my favorite articles, and we read it every year in our program. And I love that idea that it's not about the research, right? It's about the outcomes that are satisfying to the participants because they were part of it. So if the research design falls apart because of whatever reason, who cares, right? That's okay. It's not the end of the world. And I think that for a researcher to hear that their design is going to fall about and then it may not be publishable in the publishable journal that they wanted to do, right? Who cares?
I have this idea for the Journal of Failures, but nobody will publish it. Nobody will read it, but such a good journal.
We would too. Oh. We would read it. We've thought about it.
Malika, I don't know if you listened to the Freakonomics podcast, but they had a whole series on
stink. I'm going to write it down.
Yeah, but they recently, I think it was a couple weeks ago, they did a whole series on all the big kind of, they're looking at behavioral economics field, but like all the big researchers who are being accused of fraud. And I thought it was fascinating, not that it matters to me like day to day about that, but just the idea of the systems, just talking about the systems that reinforce bad behavior and punish the good research behavior. And I think some of they did, like you said, some of they did is why don't we have more journals that focus on, hey, everybody, we did this. It didn't work. Here's why it might not have worked. Here's what you might want to try in the future, as opposed to like, no. The only research that's ever been published totally works 100% of the time. Trust us on that. And now I'm a tenured professor because I wrote this important research, as opposed to the idea that a lot of stuff doesn't work or it doesn't replicate, or it works once and it works for this group but not that group. And
I have a big passion for translational research. I have a huge passion for my colleagues that are doing translational research, in the sense that these are very important questions, but an applied question has dramatic implication about people's quality of life and animals' quality of life, for that matter. I have colleagues working in applied behavior analysis that are interested in animals and other organisms' lives. These are very important questions, but if you're going to make it an applied question, the question needs to come from the community.
Mm-hmm.
And quality of life is not something that is determined by an outsider looking in. And if you don't belong in this community, that's cool. You can still help, but the question and the solution resides within them.
For me, when we talk about the community-based participatory research, it is very hard, and it's taken me a while to get away from the idea that, yeah, but the community wants that, but do we care? Because the scientists sure do know a lot. They read a lot of books. Maybe the community hasn't read the same books. Maybe they don't know the answer. And it has been really eye-opening to recognize that just because one has done a lot of research or done a lot of reading or have a lot of ideas, that's good to bring to a conversation. However, it is not the conversation. And I know, I have always sort of grown up and read research as like, well, these are smart people who are trying to help everyone. Therefore, we should listen to them. And I think the more I learn about other ways we could do research, the more it feels like, perhaps a lot of the, not to throw stones at so many great people who've done so much important research, but they sort of feel like comic book villains where they're like, no, I have to take over the world because I have the best solution. And, the superheroes all fight against that Dr. Doom or whatever, because like they know best. They know better than everybody what everyone needs for peace, right? As opposed to asking people in the communities where you're looking to, help support improvements. What do you think? What are the problems? And then here are some thoughts and ideas, and then including them in that process. But that was not, as much as I think the concept when you read it, I don't know if it's that hard to read it, but then to practice it or to think and sit with that idea of like, scientists don't have to know all the answers. In fact, they can't know all the answers and they don't know all the answers. I know, maybe that's just my Western pro-science upbringing, I guess. But I think that was the biggest hurdle. Once you get over that, I think it's very exciting. Well, it's always exciting, but less scary.
Exciting. No, I think here's the bottom line. And I think we can all like harmonize on this. Science is invigorating. Science is fun. Science is innovative. Science is optimistic. And science is one of the most amazing objective foundations of how our community progresses. If we act like we know all the answers, and if we act like and if we villainize other people for the way that they're going about trying to find answers, this becomes a personal problem. It doesn't need to be a personal issue. Like, right. if we're constantly trying to innovate and find out interesting things about the patterns of behavior across organisms, perhaps vilifying people is going to halt the progress. And I stick around. Like, I'm so glad that y'all invited me, because I really do want to have more conversations outside of my virtual classroom, right? So my students are the best at KU, right? They're like, yes, Dr. Pritchett, you know what you're talking about. I'm like, no, let's talk to other people too, because who knows? But I really do think that more conversations like the ones that we're having, where we can just genuinely say to each other, I don't know, but I'm hopeful, is really good stuff. And all of that being said, I like to equate science to football, and I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, and I could have a lot of opinions about what Jerry Jones is or is not doing, but at the end of the day, we're not winners as I sit today. No matter when this is happening, no matter when this is going online, the Cowboys are not going to the Super Bowl, and that's just that.
No,
I'm not vilifying the game. It's easier to vilify Jerry Jones, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's yell about the game. Let's yell about tactics. Let's yell about plays that shouldn't have been done. Like, let's do that in science too. Don't yell at people. As much as I want to be upset with these young men playing a game, let's do tactics. And I think that's what we should do in science, right? That's what I do my research around. Like, let's look at the permanent products, figure out what's wrong, and win the Super Bowl next time. Sorry, I brought it to the Dallas Cowboys for no reason, but I'm just so upset.
No, I hear what you're saying. Oh, you're upset about the Cowboys?
Yeah, well, and science.
I'm really sorry.
One, I think you have more control over. I think with football, it's one of those things of like, I feel like I could do more, but I don't know. Yeah.
Right.
Sort of.
Okay. I think what I hear you saying is that the scientific community is a culture in and of itself, right? And we're all participating within that culture, sometimes whether we want to or not, right? But there's that game that you play if you are wanting to be in that world, right? And some of it you don't think about because that's just the way that things have always been done. And it takes stepping back and like sitting with it and getting really deep into things before you can start to recognize and see some of these underlying practices that might be harmful to different communities that exist within the culture that, again, like we're all part of and we all participate within. So we're a product of contingencies just like anyone else, and no one is therefore to blame in the sense that our behavior, flows where reinforcement flows. But if we step back and look at those systems and say, perhaps the wrong things have been receiving reinforcement, then it's up to us as a community and a culture to then change what is met with reinforcement within this academic and research setting.
And I like that. I like the behavior goes where reinforcement flows. It's a riff off the matching law, right? Like the
I didn't make it up.
No. The ratio of performance meeting the ratio of reinforcers and how those allocations of responding happen over time. But what I don't think it speaks to is the complex contingencies of reinforcement that humans are actually under. And it doesn't speak enough to the fact that there's competing contingencies in our environment. And they have a lot to do with who I am as a person, who I am as a researcher, who I am as a mom, who I am as a person that's coming to talk with you lovely folks on an afternoon about science. And I think that all of those contingencies can converge and they can conflict sometimes. And unfortunately, what I think that people aren't arguing in the science and behavior analysis, and they don't have again, I'm going to say a bad word, but my kids are okay because I say it every time. But if you don't have the huevos, they say it in Spanish, if you don't have a conversation with me about a particular point and we argue the point to death, then I will have much more respect for that conversation more than I don't like Malika because she talks about things that I don't like. That's different. Let's argue the point about the science. Let's argue about the competing contingencies. Let's analyze the contingencies. And I think the problem is that people are not having enough arguments about the science. I have friends that have way more published articles than I do. And I'll read an article and I'll text them and be like, yo, didn't like this, line 42, page 7, what's going on? And we have conversations about points, but at the end of the day, love you. Thanks for doing the scientific thing. Let's do something else tomorrow. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'll talk to you soon. Yeah. But things are getting really personal, and I'm I'm worried about that. So I hope that I didn't like turn this in a direction that's based on my heart right now and my feelings, but just like, holy smokes, like double down on the science and what's not going right. Don't hurt each other. This is not the way forward. If y'all say something on a podcast that I don't like, then I might call you and be like, what the heck? Why'd you say that? This is how I feel about it. Or we'll be at a conference together over wine. I'm like, what the heck? You know what I mean? But don't hurt people, and don't be discriminative towards people, and don't use punishment contingencies towards people while on the other end saying we should be anti-punishment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Malika, you can feel free to send us an email if we ever say something on a show you want to.
I mean, I probably won't, but I probably will.
We have a whole episode where like people will write us things when we do this podcast. They'll write all sorts of like things we messed up or things, and usually people just write nice things, which is great. We love it, but at the same time, it's like no, we're good with the idea of here's something you didn't get right, or here's something that I get the context, but you're not. You're reflecting what it means in this other content. We're always happy to hear that, because I think of all the things that we've gained from doing the show, it is the ability to listen and talk and hear about things that might make us uncomfortable and being okay with it. And then saying, we're going to publicize our uncomfortable conversation so that everyone can hear it. And it just somebody makes it easier, because we know that we could either record ourselves like listening and trying to understand better and trying to make change, or us being like loud, like, no, I don't like this change and I don't have to listen to you. Like, there are a lot of people who like those kinds of podcasts. That's not the show we ever wanted to be.
Former of the two.
It's going to be the listening podcast and the learning.
Well, we never know. You don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think when we sort of talk about that general kind of attitude of like some folks just getting better and better at listening, some doubling down on refusal to listen. I know personally, and I don't know if this is necessarily the same, but for you, but you did bring up in the article the idea of COVID-19 as a real disruptor for a lot of sort of our traditional socially inequitable practices. How have you been feeling things have gone since sort of the pandemic has been, technically officially over? Because it seemed like everyone was ready for change and excited to talk about change. And as days go on, it seems like not everyone, but a lot of people are really scrabbling to get back to the old way of doing things, but in a way that's not sustainable in itself. Like, let's go back to the way things were pre-pandemic, which we can never do because it happened and it changed everybody's life. And I think it becomes, borderline harmful to not think about how we can do things differently in the future. And I know I've been feeling very frustrated that things that sounded like they were sure things, maybe 6 months ago are now like, well, let's see. Well, let's just keep doing what we used to do. I mean, do you feel there's still that burning passion for change in these ways? Or is there this kind of vacillating attitude? Like, what are you feeling? What are you thinking when it comes to, some of those, not promised changes, but some of the changes that seemed on the horizon?
I think people will strive to seek environments that make them the most comfortable and allow them the most access to their reinforcers. I live in Texas, for better or for worse. And one of the things that it helps being in the middle of the country and in the South is that you can see efforts like DEI efforts and universities having specific, I don't know what the word is, like, holy smokes, the word's not complicating. It's like groups or parts of their university that are in charge of DEI efforts that they've, decided, well, no, we don't need this anymore. We're taking this away. And bigger companies are doing that also. I really do think that behavior analysis is not on the forefront. I don't mean that disrespectfully to the science. Applied behavior analysis in particular is not on the forefront. And I have examples, right? Mm-hmm. These are the receipts. My children, every time I learn a term, they tell me not to say it anymore. But these are the receipts, is what I've been told the youngsters like to hear. And that cultural humility, Dr. Patricia Wright, wonderful article about cultural humility and applied behavior analysis. Cultural humility comes from medicine. Right? Participatory action research, community-based participatory research, that comes from anthropology, right? Ruha Benjamin, Dr. Benjamin, is one of the most amazing scholars ever. She's traditionally a sociologist, works in the Department of I don't know if it's African American studies or something similar at Princeton University. Dr. Bettina Love is inspirational. She is at Columbia, and she talks about abolitionism with regard to teaching is concerned. She's a educator scientist in that regard. So these are the folks that are on the forefront of where we need to go as far as envisioning changing systems. Behavior analysis is behind the queue in a lot of regards. Do I see people with the same energy? Probably not, but similar to what Todd Risley said, conditions under which there's a lot of negative reinforcement contingencies and punishment contingencies, people act a lot. That's just the way the behavior works. But I think that people think everything's okay. But I think that the people think everything's okay are not from historically or currently marginalized communities. I think they're just marching along because their lives are easier, because they're from an existence that doesn't have difficult conversations in their household every day. I'm not saying that's good or bad. Just is what it is. Like, it can seem like status quo when it's not actually the conditions under which people are suffering. If you're perpetuating the status quo, then that checks out.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, we're kind of coming to the end of our time together. And much like whenever we have an episode or we start talking with someone about a really huge issue with lots of layers, we get to the end of our time. It's like, I don't think we solved it. We didn't get to the paper that had the answer. We got stuck in, a table or something. They were great tables, but, we didn't get to the answer today. We were never going to get to the answer today because as much as I know I've certainly learned a lot from talking tonight, and hopefully our listeners have been able to learn a lot. We're only a few in structures needing change. So why don't we kind of, for conclusions, we'll move into our last section, the dissemination station, and maybe we'll think a little bit about the big next steps. Oh, there we are. We're there, man. That's why Jackie makes the big bucks, because she's got the Foley skills, train skills.
I have the train skills.
So I guess, is there like a specific, if you had to name one current social structure that is creating the most problems in terms of moving closer to social justice practices? Is there one that kind of comes to mind, especially maybe one that, hey, even though we're behind as a field, our field, that we could probably jump in and make a big impact, tomorrow? Like, does anything come to mind for that?
Gosh. That made my brain hurt. Can you ask it again? I promise.
How are you going to fix everything, Malika? What's the answer? The simple question. No, in terms of when we think of like so many social structures, I mean, certainly in reading your work, so much historically has been, here's a group, and this group is the reason that things are bad. It's them. And here's how we as, colonial scientists are going to fix the problem, right? Are there, and we know this to now be, we know it has been known by some and hopefully known by more to be bad practice. When we talk about sort of some of those same types of structures that create lots of problems in moving towards social justice, are there sort of social structures that kind of jump out at you as like, well, that is one that is so pernicious and so harmful, and I want it to go away? But we'll go back to magic wand thinking. I would magic wand that structure away or that practice away.
I'm only on the rant for today, right? My husband's a behavior analyst also, and we were just having really like meaningful conversations this morning over coffee, and I'll only say the rant for today, and it's not a global rant. So ask me next week the same question. But the rant today is that researchers are walking into research contexts and questions with an a priori assumption of what they want to prove to be true. Mm-hmm. This is not behavior analysis. This is not behavior analytic work. This is not an inductive approach to research. This is I know the answer. I'm going to walk into this community assuming that my tool is going to work. And if my tool doesn't work, then it's not the tool's fault. It's the fact that I don't know. I don't ever know what they say on the other side of that. It's not the tool's fault. We just need to use the tool again. Sometimes that's what the research article says. Like, it's not the tool's fault. Let's just do it again. Like, bruh, you decided the tool was going to work before you. Like, I've had the privilege of working with so many people, like people that work in construction, people that are engineers that have worked on cars, people that have built supercomputers. My dad used to work at Texas Instruments. It's old school. It's like
I know Texas
calculators,
Instruments.
and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and the curiosity was, what are these things that we can build, and how do we make them? Like, how do they work? But instead, it's like, people are calling things applied, and they're just like, well, I have this thing, I'm going to put it on you, and I'm going to make sure that it works. And if it doesn't work, it's not me, it's the tool or whatever it may be. So anyway, that was the rant I was on today, but that's just today. Tomorrow I'll be on a different rant. Like, I don't know. I'm a little bit of a hummingbird with regard to my my opinions, but that's the opinion for today. I hope that helps.
It definitely does. And I think it kind of leads into my last question, which would be, we have a lot of listeners who are not researchers. And so, the question was sort of, what would be kind of the follow-up, day-to-day activity that if you said, hey, folks, even if you're not researchers, if you believe in social justice and you want to work towards social justice practices, I'd say blank. And I kind of going off your rant, which was a good rant. I liked it a lot. We all liked it a lot. It might be that, for me, not to answer the question for you, but now I'm thinking, oh, gee, maybe the one I want to do is that same a priori assumption of like, well, this works in the research, therefore this is going to work in this situation. And if it doesn't work, well, it's somebody else's problem. Or, well, it's because this isn't the way it should be. And that's on this environment or the client or the stakeholder, and they need to fix it because I was right the whole time, and I need to make sure that I, shove whatever my idea is down everyone's throat because it's their problem when it's not working. And I know that's something that I have done in the past. I try very hard not to do. I try to approach everything with that sense of curiosity and the acknowledgement of, the organism is always right. So if something's not working, I need to be cool with the fact that, maybe my idea was not good, or maybe it was not the right idea for this situation, and I need to do more work on my end rather than make everyone else do more work on their end to make my idea totally work, even though it probably never will, no matter what everyone else does. So I don't know if that's the one you would come up with, but now I'm thinking of that one. Yikes. But if there's something else you would tell listeners, hey, if you believe in social justice, you should be doing blank every day, or you should try doing blank every day if you're very new to the idea or the concept, what would your recommendation be? Well, for the non-researchers.
Yeah, for sure. For the non-researchers, I'll speak to the conversations. I wish that all of you could come to the classes that I teach with students at the University of Kansas, because those students are on the forefront of behavior analysis, and they are teaching me new words every day. I have to keep a pen and paper when we're talking to each other because I have to look things up because they know things more than I do, right? They're teaching me new terms and so on and so forth. But a meaningful conversation that we couldn't answer, we didn't know what the answer was last week when I was talking to my students, but we were talking in class really meaningfully was, who cares about all of these assessments? VB MAPS, the ABLES, the MAS, the FAST, the QABF. Who cares about all of these assessments if you don't know the actual demographics of who the clients are and what their families are, and who's coming into your, let's just say clinic. I'm going to use my quote fingers because you could be serving people in lots of different contexts. I work with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I've been in group home settings, residential facilities, clinics, so on and so forth. Doesn't matter. Whoever the person is, who are they? What language do they speak? What religions do they practice? What spiritual practices do they have? Who are their parents? Are they immigrants or are they not? Are they parents that have served in the military or not? Do they come from this country or not? Where do they live? So on and so forth. Like, it's very important to understand a person's history of learning and the values that they have and what is important for making your clinical recommendations. But if you don't know who they are, then you could easily make clinical recommendations that are socially valid, but not ecologically valid. Ecological validity means that this is an important skill for you to learn, but it also matches the context that you live in. Mm-hmm. Is it important for you to learn how to cross the street independently at a crosswalk so that you don't get hit by a car? In my neighborhood here in Austin, Texas, 1,000%. If you live in rural Nebraska and your nearest neighbor is 100 miles away from your radius, probably not a good social skill, very socially valid, but not ecologically valid. And so understanding the demographics of the people we serve and matching the treatment programs to their lived context and their future goals that the parents and their families want them to go to, I think that's the most non-colonial thing that you can do in clinical practice.
Okay.
That was well put.
I know. I
love that.
I got two things I got to focus on. All right. I will do that. Whew. Well, Dr. Malika Pritchett, thank you so much for coming on our show and for sharing so much about the work you've been doing and for having so many big questions and again, helping guide this conversation. I know I have continued to learn a lot, and it has been something that I've been very excited about. Like I said, very, very jazzed reading these, continue to be jazzed talking about these. So,
y'all are the sweetest. And I will say that all of my excitement and inspiration is on the youth, like my children, undergraduate students, graduate students. Like that's where I spend the most of my time. So if anything happens, let me know, because I'm hanging out with the youngsters and trying to learn TikTok dances and and all that. So let me know what's happening, because otherwise I'm just doing other stuff over here. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Malika, if folks wanted to reach out to email you or with any questions or, ask about good resources, are you okay with sharing your email address?
Absolutely. It's just malikap@ku.edu. And then I'm also malika.pritchett on Instagram, and my twin boys are helping. They're 14. They're helping me with my Instagram. So I'm going to get better and better, y'all.
Oh, nice. Maybe they can help us too.
Yeah, if they're looking for some after school work. Yeah,
they're happy to help. They're very nice.
All right. Well, we want to say again, big thanks to Dr. Malika Pritchett for coming on the show. But before we wrap, we've got one more section, and that's pairings.
Oh, right. Hooray. It's time for pairings. Pairings is a section of the show where I recommend back episodes of the podcast that you might be interested in listening to if you enjoyed the topic that was part of the discussion for today. So we touched on a lot of different stuff today. So therefore, I have several different pockets of episodes that you might be interested in, but they include, in kind of no particular order, episode 135, Social Justice in ABA with Denisha Jingles and Aaron Donovan. Episode 128, Diversity and Inclusion with Adrian Bradley and Kat Jackson. Episode 165, in which we discuss quality of life. Episode 219, Call to Action on Rikers and Lovaas with Matt Cipriati and Sarah Campow. Episode 243, Research Applications in DEI with Sarah Lachago. Episode 100, History of ABA with Gina Green. And episode 250, History of ABA and Psychology with Mirari Okoro. So lots to pick from there. As part of pairings, I also like to recommend a snack that you could enjoy while you listen to this episode and or some of these other ones here. So what did I pick for us today? Well, our guest for today, Dr. Malika Pritchett, lives in Texas, but she teaches for the Kansas online program. So I was like, what unites these two areas? And I thought barbecue. So that is our snack for today, is some barbecue sliders. If you don't like to have them with meat, you can also have them with jackfruit. I don't know if you ever had that, Rob.
Yes.
It's pretty good.
I did.
Yeah,
we have it at the Mega Maze. They sell it near us.
Yeah. So it's available for everyone.
They put it in mac and cheese, though. I'm not a big mac and cheese fan, so
I like it. They make it like a parfait. So it's like a layer of mac and cheese.
The kids really like it.
Pulled pork or whatever, meat, barbecue meat, and then mac and cheese, and then barbecue meat again, and then cornbread?
I don't know. I don't remember.
I don't either, but I don't know.
Check back in next October when we...
Parfait is weird, but otherwise it's quite good.
Yes. I have the sandwich with the jackfruit alternative. It is good.
Yeah, so barbecue sliders and then to go with them, I'm recommending a lemonade as well, because if you remember back to the beginning of the episode, Dr. Pritchett told us about sort of her journey and how initially she had some pitfalls that she was able to overcome and that led her towards our particular field. And we're obviously very, very lucky to have her here. So she kind of made some lemonade out of lemons in that circumstance, and those go well with barbecue sliders.
All right.
Yay.
Thanks, Diana. Thank you for those yummy choices and those delicious back episodes. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Thanks again to Dr. Malika Pritchett for coming on and talking all about her work and social justice practices. We want to thank you also for listening to the show. We'd appreciate if you haven't to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us also online as abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to all of our previous episodes, as well as links to purchase CEs. You can also find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track, or email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. If you want even more ABA Inside Track goodness, including episodes a week ahead of time, chance to vote on our quarterly listener episodes and our quarterly book clubs, as well as some free CEs and discounts for other CEs, you can also subscribe to us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And we couldn't do the show without some other thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. And finally, just because I don't want to forget it, our last secret code word is Jayhawk. Jayhawk. It's the KU mascot, the Jayhawk. Isn't that band? There's a band, Jayhawk?
The Jayhawks.
Okay, that's an S. This has no S. All right, that's the last code word. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye!